All right, we're back at it again with some information about compensation. It's the conversation that I am like, can we please all just get on a similar page? We don't even have to be on the same page, understanding and doing things the same way, but can we all come to like some type of agreement? The Tennessee Realtors shared this article in our digest on April 7th, which was this week. If you're not receiving the digest from the Tennessee Realtors, you are missing out. This comes straight from the president and our CEO, which is Angela. So here is our issue. I'm just going to walk you through what it said in here. And if you're not receiving this, contact them so you can get these updates because there's some pretty important information in here. So let me get past. Angela did some really cool things with Congress. So right here we are. Compensation options. There's been a lot of discussion in a lot of my classes at the associations, conversations on Facebook, almost to the point where it's like heated conversations and everybody's going off on little tangents. But I just want to clarify how the compensation options work for the Tennessee Realtors based with the Tennessee Realtors forms. Now, there are some firms that have their own forms. Shoot, there's brokers that have builders and they have completely different contracts, and that's allowable. The Tennessee law just requires that a contract be written to be enforceable. So it doesn't have to be on a Tennessee Realtors form. It just needs to be written so it can be enforceable. So let's walk through what they've got covered here in these compensation options, just in case you didn't get this email and you're trying to figure out, what's been going on. So first things first, compensation options within Tennessee's forms. There are lots of different options. You can access your forms library from the Tennessee Realtors through several different service providers. The most common is Transaction Desk. If you come to any of my Transaction Desk classes, I walk you through how these forms operate and how you can search for them by either a keyword or by their form number. The forms library is broken up into series. And so I'm going to walk you through some of those forms. And if you'd like to have the Cliff Note version of which form goes to which form number, I'd be happy to share that with you. Just let me know and I'll get it sent over to you. If you've come to any of my contract classes, I share that with you. I also have it available on my Aligned Access site, which is my training site for all of you new folks watching this video. All right, let's walk through option number one. Option number one, each consumer compensates their independent licensee. Each consumer, buyer and seller, compensates their independent licensees, meaning when a seller works with a listing agent, they sign what we call the listing agreement. That's the RF 101, which establishes the designated agent for the listing. Now, there are other listing services that are available, like a non-exclusive listing agreement, but the most common is an exclusive listing agreement where there's a designated agent, and that form is the RF 101. So that's what's listed here. In the RF 101, the seller has the opportunity to list a total amount on the blank line on line 62. Now, on the other side, the buyer also signs their own agreement, which is a written agreement with their agent. And so this could be in the form of an exclusive buyer's representation, or it can be a non-exclusive buyer's representation. You also have the opportunity now to sign the new form for this year based off of the August 17th changes, and we call that the touring agreement. So here they've referenced the RF 141. That's the exclusive buyer's representation agreement for designated agency. Very specific. The other form is the 143, that's non-exclusive, and the 145, which is your touring agreement. All three of those agreements all outline what the buyer is responsible to compensate to the buyer broker. Now, it does also further state that the buyer broker is going to negotiate on behalf of the buyer to have that amount negotiated as part of the agreement, whether it's coming from the seller, whether it's coming from the listing broker. It does state that they're going to negotiate on behalf of the buyer to get that fee covered. But the buyer could say, hey, don't negotiate that fee. I will pay the fee. And the listing side could say, hey, I'm going to pay your fee, but I'm not paying a cooperative fee. So each consumer can compensate their independent licensees, and that's allowable. Now let's talk about option number two, because option number one is not as common. Let's talk about option number two. This is most common, where we have cooperative compensation. And I taught Code of Ethics today, and we got into Article 3 just for a brief moment because it's pertinent information that the agents need to know. And we talked about cooperation. And I had to remind the agents that compensation is not coupled with cooperation, meaning that I can cooperate with you as the other broker, but I don't have to pay you compensation. Your agreement with your buyer already states that the buyer pays the bill, and you're going to negotiate for my side, the listing side, to hopefully cover that bill, whether it's through a concession or it's through a cooperative share. So this cooperative compensation is how we've been operating for a very long time, since the 90s, when buyer agency became more prevalent. So let's talk about how cooperative compensation works for just a moment. Under RF 101, which is your listing agreement, the seller has the opportunity to negotiate with their listing agent for a fee. The listing agent's going to provide them with what services they're going to render. They're going to talk about what their marketing plan is, and they're going to line out and say, hey, based off of the market value of your house and off the services that I'm going to render, here's kind of how the money's going to fall. We call that a net sheet. And so in that, the current way that the agreement is written is that it is a total amount due to the listing broker. It's very big. It says total. Now, from the total, the next paragraph talks about cooperative compensation. And the seller has the opportunity in that moment to negotiate with their listing agent, or the listing broker in this case, because the agreements are with the broker and the agent is designated. Backtrack a little bit. But in this moment, they have the decision to say, okay, I'm going to pay you this total for these services we just talked about. And of that total, I would like for you to take some of that total and offer it to the buyer broker, should there be a buyer broker who cooperates and brings the buyer. The seller gets to decide what that amount is. It's not 50-50. It's not 60-40. There's really no math to it. It's whatever the seller and the listing broker decide. So this new paragraph that came about right as we were changing into the August 17th dates where things were coming up and changing, this is the new paragraph that replaced where it used to say if you were a member of the MLS or you were not a member of the MLS, you were paid sometimes the same number and sometimes a different number. So those paragraphs went away. This new cooperative compensation paragraph replaced it and just said, hey, simply, should the seller want you to also receive some compensation from my total as the listing broker, that is going to be X amount of dollars or a percent of the purchase price. The seller and the listing broker decided that. Okay. So that goes on line 68 of the RF 101. It's predetermined. But the seller has the right to say, I only want to pay a total to you, my listing broker. That's it. I'm just paying you. And I'd like to negotiate if the buyer needs some assistance. They have that right. They've always had that right. So conversely, the seller does not wish to offer cooperative compensation. So in this case, if the seller is not offering cooperative compensation, a 0 goes onto that line. So the total would only be to the listing broker. The cooperative compensation on line 68 would be 0. So let's talk about line 47 to 48 on the RF 141. This is where it gives the buyer broker the authorization to cooperate for compensation. And that's where the buyer broker is going to negotiate with the listing broker to say, hey, is there any offer of cooperative compensation being offered? Because I need to tell my buyer if there is or is not. Are they on the hook for this bill on their buyer broker agreement that we've already predetermined what my buyer broker fee is going to be? So here we are in this big old mess where things have changed just slightly. The way we do business has changed. But the way that the contracts are written did not change, minus the cooperative compensation paragraph just being reworded to decouple from the MLS, which is the listing service. So here we are. The buyer broker now is getting ready to go show this property, or maybe they're just doing initial phone calls just to kind of figure out where the listings are at, so they can then turn around and educate the buyers on what's going down on these properties that they like. So the buyer broker reaches out to the listing broker and says, hey, I'm just reaching out. My client's interested in your property, and I need to know, is there an offer of cooperative compensation, or is there an offer of compensation? Okay. What they're doing is they're doing their fiduciary duties found on line 149, where they're authorizing the buyer agent to receive cooperative compensation. But they're also doing their fiduciary duty to figure out, is the buyer going to pay this bill or not? And if the listing broker comes back and says, just put it in the offer, you simply instead could say, hey, we are not offering cooperative compensation. The end. That lets the listing broker know, or the buyer broker know, that the listing broker doesn't have cooperative compensation in their listing agreement. So we are not offering cooperative compensation. Easy. Okay, rather than going head to head on this, it's a little bit easier just to say we're not offering cooperative compensation. Now the buyer broker knows they need to turn around and go to the buyer and say, hey, they're not offering cooperative compensation. So now you're going to be on the hook for this bill if we can't negotiate it as part of the terms of the agreement. You see where I'm at? This part has been so messy. And the agents on the listing side keep getting meaner and meaner and meaner. And I'm like, guys, let's stop being mean in the sandbox. Let's all work together here. The buyer broker's just trying to figure out, is their buyer going to have to come to the table with some money? Because their lender needs to know, are they coming to closing, having to pay the buyer broker bill on their agreement that they've got on the other side? So let's go a little bit further in this one. If the buyer broker reaches out to the listing broker and the listing broker says, yep, we're offering cooperative compensation. The buyer broker says, great, what is the amount being offered? The listing agent at that time needs to say what the offer of compensation is based upon what they put on line 68 in the RF 101. Predetermined. What is the number? It's not, it depends on the offer. It's predetermined in the listing agreement, you guys. Predetermined. And if the amount is zero, then you say it's zero. There's nothing to offer. Okay, so it's predetermined. They come up with a number, whatever the number is. It could be a dollar amount. It could be a percent of the purchase price. Whatever the amount is, you then have to disclose it to the buyer broker. Then from there, the buyer broker is going to go back to the buyer and they're going to say, hey, they are offering blank. Our agreement is a blank. If they equal each other, great, you proceed. If they don't equal each other, you've got a situation on your hands. If the amount that is offered is less than what the buyer broker agreement says, then the buyer has to pay the difference at closing. Meaning, buyer broker has a higher amount than what is being offered through the cooperative compensation from the listing. There's a line on your RF 141 that states that should there be a difference owed, the buyer is responsible for compensating the buyer broker, aka the licensee representing the buyer, the difference of the amount listed on the agreement. Okay, now you can negotiate that through the terms, but it's not as part of the offer of cooperative compensation. It's different. Cooperative compensation is one thing, concessions are a different thing. All right. So if cooperative compensation is being offered by the listing agent based on their agreement with the seller, then an RF 702, which is a cooperative compensation agreement between the listing broker and the buyer broker. Okay. In Tennessee, we call it the selling broker, is the person that represents the buyer. But should there be an offer of cooperative compensation offered by the listing agent from that total, then the seller is going to have their agent present the RF 702. This is completed by the listing agent and it's presented to the selling agent, reflecting the amount agreed upon, the predetermined agreed upon amount. Okay, so your RF 101 line 68 matches your RF 702. So previously, you would create the 702, or in most cases, it was created on the buyer side, meaning the buyer's agent created the 702 to send over once the agreement was bound. We had an acknowledgement of receipt, meaning signed, sealed, delivered. We're bound under contract. I acknowledge it. And at that point, that's usually pre 817. That's when the 702 would go across the table. But it should have never been that way, because that agreement is the agreement of what the listing broker was always going to pay the selling broker. And again, that was already predetermined in the agreements when it said you were a member of the MLS versus you were not a member of the MLS. So we've been doing this form wrong for quite some time. And I think it was just a coaching and consulting moment, honestly. The agents, you guys weren't getting educated, or you weren't taking the time to get educated, which I feel bad for you. So that's why I'm here, and that's why I'm so passionate about educating everybody, and why I'm passionate about these forms. So let's talk about this 702. Some firms have decided to not sign a 702, and they will only negotiate and have compensation as part of the purchase and sale agreement. That's fine. That's their firm's decision. That's their firm's policy. However, we do need to work in the sandbox together. So if you are a buyer broker on the side that says we don't sign 702s, you need to understand that you've put the listing side into a position where they now need to do a listing amendment to change the total and change the cooperative compensation to 0, to be able to move forward with whatever you've offered on, because your company has decided not to sign the 702. So just know that when we're cooperating and we have cooperative compensation as a form of a part of the total, the 702 should be completed by the listing agent and the selling agent, reflecting the agreed upon amounts. If the amount's sufficient, then there's no need to address compensation anywhere in the purchase and sale agreement. It's on the 702. Just like we did before 817. But if the amount of the cooperative compensation being offered is not satisfactory to the buyer, and the buyer would like the selling agent to be compensated at a higher amount for the buyer to be able to afford the property, the buyer can ask the seller to compensate the buyer's agent an additional amount within the purchase agreement. And so this agreement portion here that we're talking about, this portion where you're talking about the difference, so the buyer doesn't have to pay it, this is a stipulation that you place. It's a clause. It's already pre-written, and you can find that clause on the RF 707. And on the RF 707, you just go down to number 24. That's where they've put the clause. This is written by the attorneys, and it simply states that the seller agrees to pay and compensate the buyer broker in the amount of blank. And you fill it in, either a dollar amount or a percent. Okay, and that would be the difference. So that way the buyer's not on the hook for that difference. All right, now the compensation agreement and the purchase agreement will be added together at the closing to get a total amount. So we've run into this situation right now where you have a listing that has this 101 with a total and a split, and then they've signed the 702 in preparation to provide it to the buyer broker. And the buyer broker is saying, no, I can't sign this form. I'm going to put it in the stipulations utilizing this new clause. So now you have this new clause. The seller and the buyer have come to an agreement. They signed the purchase agreement. It is now bound between the two consumers, and one of the agent signs the acknowledgement of receipt. You now have a legal document. The second the buyer and the seller sign, you're now bound. But they're bound under those terms, but the listing side is still bound to the terms of the 101. And so now you, at this point, have to do a listing amendment if you didn't previously do it, because the seller is now on the hook for the total plus whatever they agreed upon in the purchase and sale agreement. So you have to be very careful. And if you're not at a firm where your brokers are walking you through these forms, you need to get into a classroom. I highly recommend you got to get into a classroom, or I recommend go to the Tennessee REALTORS podcast. They've been covering this for months, talking about this for months. And there's going to be more coming out. And that's why this article is so great. And everybody really needs to dig deep in this article, copy it, save it, print it. I'm going to laminate it for our office. So you got to watch these things. Now, number 3, let's go to option 3 while I'm on my tangent here. Option 3, the seller to compensate buyer's agent directly at closing. So now we are not talking about cooperative compensation. There is not a total, and the listing broker is going to offer some of their total to a buyer broker through cooperative compensation. This is now, there is no cooperative compensation, and you put 0 on line 68 of the RF 101, which is how many of the firms are moving. We're just going to negotiate through the purchase and sale agreement with this new clause. It's easy. It's simple. Not everybody's doing it, but it is an option. Okay. If the buyer would like for the seller to compensate the buyer's agent directly at closing, they can enter into that special stipulation language, which is provided in your stipulations on the RF 707. That's your additional contract language if you've never seen it before. And it is specifically number 24. Okay, this is a negotiable item between the seller and the buyer. It's placed into the stipulation block. And if you're utilizing Transaction Desk, you can click on your stipulation block. A little window will pop up that says Add Clause. You just click the little Add Clause button, and then from there, it's going to open up a pop-up window. And you click on System Clauses, and then there's a search bar. And in the search bar, you can type in number 24, or you can scroll all the way down to the bottom. It's the last one in the systems list. You click on the circle radio button next to it. It will add it to your basket, and you just click to add to the stipulation, and it'll like copy and paste and put the stipulation on your block for you. If you don't know how to do that, come see me in Transaction Desk class. I'll show you how to do that. But from here, it's in your stipulation block. There's a little line where you can put the amount. What's the amount that your buyer broker agreement says that you need to negotiate for the seller to cover? Now, it could be the entire amount on your buyer agreement, or the buyer could say, hey, I'm going to pay some of it and I need the seller to cover the rest of it. Whatever the amount is, you're going to put it in, whether it's $1 or a percent of the purchase price. It's negotiable. All of this is negotiable. So it gets negotiated. You submit the offer. It goes over to the seller. The seller now looks at this offer, and maybe the terms fit what they need, but the finances do not. And the finances include this compensation for the buyer broker that is being asked for. You know, there might be some buyer expenses, some title expenses, other things that you've already previously negotiated on the sections above. But this section specifically might be the one where they say, hey, we can cover your buyer's expenses and we can cover these title expenses, but we cannot cover the buyer broker compensation at that rate or at that amount. And so we would like to counteroffer, and they'll go ahead and counteroffer the amounts. Now, they could counter some other things. It's all negotiable. The buyer broker and the buyer are now going to get this counteroffer. They're going to review. They're going to discuss it. Does the buyer agreement need to change, meaning that the buyer is not going to be on the hook for the difference? Maybe the buyer and the buyer broker agree that whatever the seller is offering at that time is agreeable for the terms. Great. You sign an amendment. Your broker approves it. Everybody's good to go. When in doubt, the broker is responsible for you and your actions. So if you don't know how to do this, go ask your broker. Because at the end of the day, the broker is the one that has to review and approve your forms, and they're responsible for your actions that you're taking with consumers. Okay, in conclusion, and I'll jump off my tangent, consumers have always had a choice when it comes to the broker compensation. Always had a choice. When you went to a listing appointment and you sat down and you did a net sheet, you negotiated for an amount, and there was an empty line for a reason, because you negotiated for your fee. Nothing's changed there. You then also disclose to the seller that, hey, oftentimes the buyer's agents ask for assistance when they're in the MLS, they're not in the MLS. The buyer's likely going to ask for help to pay their broker, because they're going to have to come to closing with either their down payment, closing expenses, or they have no money, but they would love to buy your house. Maybe they're using THDA or some other grant service to cover the expenses, but they just need help with this buyer broker expense. Nothing's changed there. The buyer broker also had a line. It was a fillable line. It's still a fillable line. The buyer and their broker are to negotiate that amount. During your buyer strategy sessions, or is what some of you call them as consultations, take the time to go through this line by line. Educate the consumer on what legal documents they're filling out. And if you're not sure what they say, get into a classroom. If your broker and your offices are not providing you with those contract classes, find a class that is so you can get educated. You've got to become competent in what you're saying. You're the licensed professional. You're supposed to walk the consumers through this. It's important to let the consumers know the compensation. And it's important to know, for them to know that compensation has always been and will continue to be fully negotiable. Now, is it negotiable 100%? Yes. Are you always going to agree on what they want the number to be? Probably not. But you don't have to sign the agreement. Somebody else can work with them. But it's always negotiable. Know your value, know your worth, yes. But if it's a situation where the consumer can't pay the bill and you knowing and willingly move forward on something that they can't afford and they get upset on the back end, shame on you. So there's some excerpts in here that came from Facts.Realtor. If you have not been on Facts.Realtor, go get on there. NAR has published a ton of valuable information that you can print out and put into these consultation packets. Okay, they're one-page sheets, there's Q&As, there's over 100 questions with answers. Consumers have choices and they need to understand where to find the information on the choices they have. Be the expert. Go show them where to find the information, provide it in your packets, talk about it on your social media, put it in your TikToks, put it on your Instagram, put it all over the face pages. Wherever you got to put it, start talking about these things. Become the expert that they know, like, and trust. Post-settlement, sellers still have a choice of offering compensation to buyer brokers. That did not go away. Cooperative compensation is still allowable. The settlement did not change that. What they did was they just wanted it to be more clear. Sellers may consider doing this in a way of marketing their home or making their listing more attractive to buyers, meaning they didn't completely say you can't offer cooperative compensation. Instead, they just said it couldn't be on the MLS. So it's off of the listing services. Now the agents have to pick up these things that we pay a ton of money for, and you go beep, beep, beep. And if you didn't know, when you talk into it, somebody talks back on the other side. Sometimes it's a voicemail, totally fine. But then you can text them. We got to have conversations now. We got to get better at conversating with each other. And agents must conspicuously disclose this to the sellers and obtain approval for any payment or offer of payment to the listing broker. Conspicuously disclose. Okay, no more hiding, no more secrets, no more, this is what the total is, but then I'm going to lie and I'm going to receive more than what the agreement says. None of that, guys. None of that. Sellers can still make that offer of cooperative compensation, but the agents cannot include it in the listing services. And that's why it's been taken away. There used to be a little field that we would put a number in, and it's gone. And you used to be able to put a number and toggle for variable rates. And if you don't know what variable rate is, that is where the listing agent and their seller at that time could say, hey, of this total, should I bring the buyer, this rate would be variable. It could reduce because I'm going to now be either a dual agent or a facilitator to the transaction, or I am going to stay representing you as your designate agent and the buyer will go unrepresented. However, you negotiated the terms for agency, because Tennessee allows us to do multiple options. It just has to be written and approved by both parties. So at that time, you could reduce your rate and it would make your offer potentially a better offer than, say, somebody else. And so that goes into the code of ethics, a whole nother rant that I will not go down today because I don't want to bore you with it. But what I do want you to do is I want you to get the digest. Go get it. Find a way to get the digest. Reach out to Tennessee Realtors if you need help. April 7th issue is fantastic. Go read through it. There's a whole bunch of other information in here, but specifically, I'm getting so many calls and so many emails on this. So I want you to go read up on compensation and the 3 options that we covered today. And if you have questions about this, again, go see your broker. Go get into some classrooms. Okay, stay off the face pages. A lot of them are being little haters right now anyway. So stay off the face pages, get in the classroom, go get educated, go get compensated, and I'll see you on the next one.